So there was a pretty interesting post made over on the Secular Talk subreddit, and it was questioning how much Kyle knows about the political topics he's talking about, but it's a more overarching question about how much you should expect political commentators or news hosts to know about any specific given topic. I think it's a really interesting thing to ask, and I think it's actually important to discuss and talk about because we should know, generally speaking, what we should expect political commentators to know about the news stories that they're talking about. Now, this post specifically was brought up because of the Pete Buttigieg situation, where he was taking paternity leave from his position as Secretary of Transportation. Of course, there was and is a supply chain crisis right now, so conservatives were blaming Pete Buttigieg. And Kyle basically said that he doesn't know if that role has anything really to do with the supply chain crisis. So this is what the post reads. It says, how much should we expect political commentators to know about the political system? I know it sounds like a silly question, but the video Kyle made on Buttigieg's family leave situation made me wonder this. Obviously, we expect political commentators to have some knowledge we lack. Otherwise, there'd be little to gain from watching them. I'm wondering what the reasonable standard should be. In the video, Kyle just flat out admits he has no idea what the responsibilities for transportation secretary are. I'm glad he admitted something he didn't know, but it got me thinking, should pundits know most of the roles in government positions do? Kyle himself has a political science degree. If I recall correctly, a field where I would expect them to cover every role at least to some extent. But on the other hand, if we take the description popularly attributed to Transportation Secretary to develop and coordinate policies that will provide an efficient and economical national transportation system with due regard for need, the environment, and the national defense, that's still pretty vague, isn't it? That sort of begs the question if the populace in general is aware of the concrete specifics of any key government roles, responsibilities. What information can we get on just what they're doing all day? What does Deb Haaland do on a daily basis as the Secretary of Interior? Feels like the general public has very little resources to know tangibly what these people are doing. And that's the thing. Feels like political commentators don't know any more than the general public does. Again, should we expect them to? If not, where can we get the information? So here's the thing, okay, so this is a really, really good question. It's a very interesting topic that's very important to understand because as you are consuming political content from political analysts on, Kyle Kulinski obviously being someone who covers the news, breaks it down, analyzes it, it is important to know, A, what should you expect them to know, and B, how much do they know, right? These are very important questions to ask. And so the truth is, if you're a political commentator, it's impossible to know anywhere even remotely close to everything because politics is so broad. And so even if you take your political science degree, that could mean a lot of different things. You're going to hit the basics of a lot of stuff, but political science is a very broad field. And so, the general education requirements, at least for the lower division courses for political science, are, international relations, political theory, intro to U.S. government, intro to politics. Those are the main courses. Those are all very different things in comparative politics. So, you can learn about how different political systems work and compare them. But that's pretty different from something like international relations or, political theory, right? Learning about Marxian theory or Aristotle and Plato. Those are all very different things, yet they're all within the political science realm. And you have to be able to know all of that. But the truth is, if you're a political commentator, your knowledge base has to go far beyond just political science because you have to understand the basics of many fields. Economics is a very important one. You have to at least have a basic understanding of macro and microeconomics, right? To talk about probably the most pressing issues, economic issues. How can you talk about them if you don't even have basic knowledge of macro and microeconomics? You got to know basic psychology because it's politics. You have to know how people think, different ways of persuasion and things of that nature. Philosophy, you have to understand the way people have overarching thoughts and what they are and, how to determine your own thoughts of that nature. You want to know some parts of criminology are very important as well, obviously, because of the justice system and how that relates to it. And if you're in the political commentator field, you're going to need to have good communication skills. So obviously, communications is an important area of knowledge to know. Journalism as well. So there's so much stuff that you have to know, and that's all beyond just political science. So you can't expect a political commentator. It's too wide of a job and a field to know everything. It's impossible. So Kyle not knowing what the transportation secretary does, I'm glad he admitted it, because the truth is, I would say 99.999 repeating sign don't know. And I know he's a political commentator, so it's his job to know, but that's beyond the realm of really reasonability in terms of, okay, what exactly does the transportation secretary do, and specifically to the supply chain crisis, right? So now, can you expect him to look that up to figure out what it is before he does a video? Because I had done a video on this too, and obviously prior to that, I didn't know exactly what the transportation secretary did. So I looked it up, and usually there are government websites that explain what the general roles of these roles are, right? So that's what I try to do. I try to bring it up and quote those, and for myself, and obviously for the people who are listening, so they can learn what it is. That, I think, is realistic, but even then, it can be hard to literally look up every single nook and cranny of a story, because there's so many stories to get through, and so many different definitions and roles and all of this stuff. And like that definition of what the transportation secretary does sounds very vague. To me, it sounds more like transportation secretary is more not transportation of goods, but rather of people, is what it sounds like to me. But who am I to really know the truth? So it's important to point to and state what experts say. So it's important to, this is why specialists are so important, right? Specialists play an important role. And if you're somebody who's more in the aggregate, like a political commentator, where your field is just so goddamn wide, it's important to look at what the specialists say and then state what the specialists say. That's what you have to do in these kinds of situations. So I would say that it's not really realistic to expect him to know exactly what the transportation secretary does. It's better that he tells you he doesn't know. Could he look it up and just read off of his paper what it does? I think that's a reasonable expectation. That is a good idea, generally speaking. But if you're somebody who's consuming political content, do not assume that the people that you're listening to know everything about what they're talking about, or even a majority of what they're talking about. So do your own research, and the real research that you can do on this is look up studies and look up the opinions of actual experts specifically in the field. So if you're trying to figure out things about climate change, look up climatology work and the opinions of scientists or the results of studies, or there are political science experts in specific fields, right? If you get a political science degree, typically, you'll go in a specific direction, whether that be international relations or political theory or whatever. And then it'll get even more specialized. Maybe you specialize in, things of economics when it comes to international relations, like the World Bank and stuff like that, instead of, foreign policy. So it can be just different kinds of things that you specialize in. And so it's important to look up what the specialists say, look up that kind of information. That's the important stuff I think that you as a viewer should do, and don't expect the political commentator to know everything. It's impossible. But again, should they look it up? I think it's a good idea. But generally speaking, I'm in the process of getting a political science degree myself now, and I'm just realizing how much you really need to know to be able to be a political commentator, because there's around 8 different subjects that you have to know at least like some basic, at least entry-level stuff, but you would ideally want to maybe even know more, right? So knowing about economics and philosophy and psychology and criminology, communications, journalism, these are all very important fields to use for being a political commentator, it's a lot of stuff to absorb, and in the political science tent, there's so many different areas to go through. So do your own research. Don't expect that political commentators know everything, and look up what the experts say about any given situation and do your own research.